In the silent darkness of the early universe, long before humans, animals, forests, or even the idea of life existed, the sun itself was still young. It burned bright, but its surroundings were wild and dangerous. Around the sun stretched a giant disk made of dust, gas, and millions of rocks drifting without order. These pieces moved like a chaotic river in space, crashing, breaking, and forming again. It was a place where creation and destruction happened at the same time. Scientists call this the solar nebula, but to any observer, it would look like a glowing storm swirling across the stars. Deep inside the storm, something important was beginning. Tiny dust grains, smaller than sugar crystals, slowly clumped together. They became pebbles. Pebbles grew into rocks. Rocks became mountains drifting through space. And then, one of these large bodies began to grow faster than the others. It pulled more and more material toward itself using gravity, becoming heavier with every collision. This growing body would one day become Earth. But Earth's beginning was nothing like the peaceful blue planet we see today. It was a world made from fire. As this early Earth formed, it was constantly hit by massive rocks, some the size of countries. Each impact released unimaginable heat, melting the surface again and again. Soon, the entire planet turned into a glowing ocean of lava, a world without solid land, without air, without water, just fire stretching from horizon to horizon. To imagine this ancient world, think of a huge burning coal floating in space. The surface bubbled with molten rock. Volcanoes erupted non-stop because the planet was still adjusting to its own formation. There was no day or night, no seasons, no calm. Only violent storms of fire, lightning, and boiling liquid rock. Earth was so hot that even metals and stones melted like butter. The air was thick with poisonous gases, carbon dioxide, sulfur, and steam. Even if someone could time travel to this era, they would not survive for a single second. The heat alone would be enough to destroy anything that came close. But the story of Earth is a story of transformation. From destruction came beauty, and from chaos came life. The early Earth did not stay alone in its fiery path. Every minute, more objects from the solar nebula struck its surface. Some were small, but many were enormous, large enough to create new mountains with a single impact. These collisions added more heat, keeping the world in a molten state. If someone watched Earth from space at that time, they would see rivers of glowing lava spreading in every direction, lighting the darkness like a giant burning lantern. The sun itself was fierce and unstable. It blasted young Earth with storms of radiation. Powerful solar winds blew across space, pushing lighter gases away and reshaping the newly forming atmosphere. The early Earth struggled to hold on to anything. It had no oceans, no sky, and no life, but it did have potential. Deep inside the planet, heavy materials like iron slowly sank toward the center, forming Earth's core. This process created a magnetic field, weak at first, but strong enough to start protecting the planet from deadly cosmic radiation. Without this early shield, life would never be possible. Above the core, the mantle churned like boiling soup, constantly moving and reshaping the surface. Even though Earth looked like pure chaos, important structures were forming. Layers, minerals, and basic elements of life were beginning to take shape in the heat and pressure. Imagine watching this world from a safe distance. It looks like a giant red sphere covered in cracks filled with glowing lava. Smoke rises into space. Explosions happen every few moments as meteors strike the surface. The air glows with heat. This world feels alive, but not with life, alive with fire. Yet even in this hellish world, something extremely important was happening. Water was beginning to arrive. Many of the rocks crashing into Earth were carrying tiny bits of ice. With every impact, they released steam. Volcanoes also released gases like hydrogen and oxygen, which formed water vapor. This steam rose into the atmosphere, creating thick clouds that covered the fiery world. But the surface was still far too hot for rain. Any drop of water that reached the ground instantly turned back into steam. The planet was trapped in a cycle of boiling heat. Still, these clouds were the first sign of change. They blocked sunlight, cooled the surface slowly, and began Earth's long journey from fire to ocean. But before Earth could cool enough for water to stay, something even more dramatic happened. a cosmic event so massive that it nearly ended the young planet forever. A giant object the size of Mars was moving through space. Scientists call it Theia. Theia and early Earth were on a collision course. No force in the solar system could stop them. When they finally struck each other, the explosion was so powerful it lit up space like a small star. The impact was not just a crash, it was a violent cosmic disaster. Huge amounts of rock and vapor blasted upward. Entire sections of Earth's surface were thrown into space. The planet melted again, even hotter than before. For a short moment, it seemed as if Earth might not survive its own birth, but something incredible formed from this destruction: the Moon. The debris circling Earth came together, forming a glowing ring like Saturn's rings. Slowly, this ring clumped to form a new body, the Moon. It began orbiting Earth closely, shining brightly in the young sky. The Moon stabilized Earth's tilt, created tides, and slowed Earth's rapid spin. Without the Moon, Earth might have remained wild and unstable. Life might never have found a calm home here. After the impact, the world was once again an ocean of lava. But now, with time, cooling began. Clouds grew thicker. Volcanic eruptions slowly changed the air. Finally, after millions of years, the surface temperature dropped enough for rain to fall without turning into steam. And when the first rain fell, it was not gentle. It was a storm that lasted centuries. Rainfall so heavy that oceans began to form. This was the moment when fire began to give way to water. The world was still dangerous, but for the first time in its existence, it was becoming a place where life could one day begin. Yet the story of life was still far away. Right now, in Part 1, the planet is only preparing itself. It is shaping the core, forming the Moon, cooling the surface, making oceans, and building an atmosphere. Everything is changing, evolving, and moving towards something greater. In the grand story of Earth, the violent beginning is not just a chapter, it is the foundation. Without fire, there would be no land. Without destruction, there would be no moon. Without storms, no oceans. Every terrible event was actually a step toward creating a living world. Anyone watching this world from space might feel fear and awe at the same time. The planet looks alive, but in a dangerous way. The glowing cracks of lava, the endless eruptions, and the thick clouds create a scene that is both terrifying and beautiful. This planet is not yet ready to breathe, but it is preparing for the moment. And so, in this fiery beginning, Earth begins its long journey. A journey from burning chaos to gentle blue, from storms to oceans, from lifeless rock to a world filled with plants, animals, and humans. Earth's story starts with fire. Its future will be shaped by life. But before life can appear, something else must happen. The planet must cool, oceans must settle, and chemistry must change. The next chapter will take Earth from destruction to transformation. This is how Earth was born. A world created in fire. A world that will soon take its first steps toward life. The young Earth was finally beginning to cool, but peace did not last long. In the silent, endless darkness of space, danger was always moving. And one world-sized danger, was quietly approaching. No one could see it, no one could predict it, but it was coming closer every second. This mysterious object would change Earth forever. It was called Theia. Theia was not a small asteroid or a comet. It was a giant body, almost the size of Mars, drifting through the early solar system. It was made of rock, metal, and frozen gases. For millions of years, Theia had its own path. But gravity is a powerful force, and the sun's gravity slowly pulled Theia closer and closer to the place where Earth was growing. Earth, still covered in thick clouds and oceans of lava, had no idea what was heading its way. It rotated fast, glowing like a hot, angry ember floating in space. The surface boiled. Volcanoes exploded, steam filled the sky. To any distant observer, Earth looked beautiful but dangerous, a world changing every moment. But far beyond the planet, Theia moved silently. There was no sound in space, no warning, no alarm, only motion. Theia and Earth were on a collision course. For thousands of years, the two bodies moved closer. Inch by inch, mile by mile, their paths tightened. Earth kept spinning. Theia kept drifting. And then, finally, the moment arrived. Two worlds met. The collision was unlike anything that has ever happened again in the history of Earth. When Theia struck, it did not simply hit the planet, it merged with it. The explosion was so powerful that it lit up the solar system like a new sun. For a brief moment, the darkness was replaced by a blazing flash that could have been seen from billions of kilometers away. Theia broke apart instantly, shattered into countless glowing pieces. Huge chunks of Earth's crust were blasted into space. Molten rock spread into the void like fiery rain. Oceans of magma splashed into the air. The sky burned, the ground melted, the planet shook from its core. Earth almost died in that moment. Its surface became a swirling ocean of fire again, even hotter than before. Mountains melted, craters formed. The air disappeared, everything was chaos. But beneath that chaos, something incredible was happening. The shattered pieces of Earth and Theia began to swirl around the Earth. Gravity pulled them into a ring, like Saturn's rings but made of fire and metal. The ring glowed bright, stretching thousands of kilometers. Dust and molten rock orbited Earth like a burning halo. Inside that glowing ring, the pieces started to come together. Slowly, quietly, a new world began to form. A small sphere grew in the orbit, pulling dust and rock toward itself. The sphere became larger and larger, shaping itself into a new body. After millions of years of drifting and collecting matter, this new body became the Moon. The Moon was born from destruction, created from the remains of a violent cosmic crash. But this Moon would become one of the most important companions Earth would ever have. Even when the Moon was young, its presence changed everything. Before the collision, Earth spun extremely fast. A single day may have lasted only 6 hours. Winds were violent. The planet swayed wildly on its axis. There were no stable seasons, no predictable climate, and no calm. But the Moon slowed Earth's rotation. Slowly, over millions of years, a day became longer, first 7 hours, then 8, then 12. The planet began to settle. The Moon also stabilized Earth's tilt. With the tilt fixed, seasons became predictable. Climate became more balanced. Without the Moon, Earth would be a completely different world, wild, unstable, and possibly impossible for life. Even today, the Moon's gravity controls the tides in our oceans. It creates the rise and fall of water, a movement that would later help life evolve. But in the early days, the Moon was much closer to Earth. It was huge in the sky, glowing brighter than anything the planet had ever seen. It pulled the lava oceans to create massive waves of molten rock. These tidal waves shaped Earth's early surface again and again. While Earth was recovering from the violent collision, its surface slowly started to cool again. Thick smoke covered the sky. Huge clouds of dust blocked sunlight. The planet, once burning and bright, became dark and stormy. Inside this darkness, magma cooled and formed the first solid crust. This crust was thin and fragile. Volcanoes tore through it constantly. Rivers of lava flowed across the land, lighting up the night with orange cracks. Steam rose into the sky, making the air heavy and toxic. But this toxic air was the beginning of something important. Gases released by volcanoes, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, water vapor, began to form the first atmosphere. It was not an atmosphere humans could breathe, but it protected the surface from deadly radiation and allowed clouds to form. Rain still could not fall. It evaporated instantly. But the clouds grew thicker, darker, and heavier. Meanwhile, Earth's core settled deeper inside. The iron core spun faster, creating a magnetic field around the planet. This magnetic field pushed away harmful radiation from the sun, making Earth safer. Without the magnetic field, the solar winds would strip away the atmosphere and destroy any chance of life. So even though the world looked violent and frightening, important steps toward life were secretly happening beneath the chaos. The Moon circled closer, shaping the tides. The magnetic field formed a shield. Clouds began to gather. The crust began to harden. Slowly, the planet moved from fire toward the possibility of water, but the surface was still too hot. Thunderstorms filled the sky, but no oceans could exist. Lightning struck constantly, lighting up the clouds with electric flashes. The air smelled of sulfur, smoke, and burning rock. It seemed impossible that this place could ever support life. Yet Earth continued to cool. For millions of years, rain fell again and again. The surface boiled, but slowly, very slowly, the temperature dropped. Steam turned into liquid. Drops of water remained on the ground longer and longer before turning to vapor. Small puddles formed in cracks on the cooling crust. Then finally, after hundreds of millions of years, the first real rain touched solid ground and stayed. At first, it was a thin layer of water. But the rain did not stop. It continued for thousands of years. Storms poured water without pause. Tiny streams turned into rushing rivers. Rivers turned into large pools. Pools merged into the first shallow oceans. The sky echoed with the sound of constant falling rain. The fire world was turning into a water world, and the moon watched silently, circling the planet it had helped shape. Earth now had a crust, an atmosphere, and oceans, but it did not yet have life. The oceans were hot and filled with chemicals. The air was thick with gases that humans could not breathe. Lightning flashed constantly, adding energy to the oceans. The world was turning into a laboratory for chemistry. Something was coming, something small, something powerful, something that would change everything, but not yet. For now, Earth was a wounded world healing slowly after the greatest impact in its history. It had survived a deadly collision. It had created a moon. It had made oceans. But the question remained, what would happen next inside those dark, boiling waters? The answer would reshape the entire history of the planet, and Earth was almost ready for it. Earth had survived its greatest disaster, the collision that created the moon. The planet was no longer a flaming ball of chaos, but it was still far from gentle. Its surface glowed in deep shades of red and orange. Rivers of lava crawled like fiery snakes. Volcanic mountains rose and collapsed in endless cycles. The air trembled with heat, and storms of smoke and ash circled the sky. But something new was beginning. Something small, slow, and almost invisible. The planet was cooling. The cooling did not happen suddenly. It took millions of years, but from space the changes were clear. The once bright planet was becoming darker. The deep glow faded. The cracks of lava became smaller. Some places even developed thin crust, weak, fragile plates that could break apart at any moment but were still important. Earth's face was changing. Although the planet was still dangerous, it had passed its most violent stages. The moon orbited closely, pulling on the molten oceans and shaping the young crust. The thick clouds of steam and volcanic gases cooled enough to blanket the sky like a heavy gray roof. The cooling meant one more important thing. Rain was coming. But before the first true rain could fall, Earth experienced a dramatic era of storms, storms unlike anything the modern world has ever seen. The sky was constantly dark with clouds. Lightning flashed every few seconds. The soundless explosions of lightning lit the surface with white fire. Thick steam rose from everywhere. The air was filled with sulfur, methane, and carbon dioxide. The atmosphere was toxic, but it was real. It was Earth's first breath, even if life could not yet use it. Now, for the first time, water vapor began condensing on a massive scale. Clouds grew darker and heavier. The planet's temperature slowly dropped. The crust thickened. The magma cooled into solid rock. Earth became strong enough to hold something it had never held before, liquid water. At last, the first raindrops fell, but they did not fall softly. They exploded. When the first drops of rain hit the burning ground, they instantly boiled into steam. Every raindrop created a burst of fog. The surface cracked with sudden bursts of white vapor, like tiny explosions happening everywhere. Still, the rain continued. Dark clouds covered the world for thousands of years. Rain fell harder and harder. Steam rose in huge pillars. The sky echoed with thunder. The crust cooled faster. The rain no longer evaporated instantly. It stayed longer and longer. Small puddles formed in tiny depressions. They boiled, but they did not disappear instantly. Earth was cooling enough to accept water. And once the planet accepted the first drops, it demanded more. Rain poured for centuries, then for millennia, then for millions of years. It was the longest and most powerful rainfall in the history of the planet. Rivers formed and rushed across the new, jagged mountains. Streams grew wider, carving deep paths in the newborn rock. These paths were the first signs of geography, the first valleys, the first basins, the first places where future oceans would form. As water collected, the temperature dropped further. Steam filled the sky, now thicker than ever. This steam trapped heat and kept the world warm, but also protected the surface from the sun's violent radiation. The atmosphere grew denser. It created pressure, just enough to allow water to stay liquid on the ground. And then it happened. The boiling puddles became deep pools. The deep pools became massive lakes. The lakes merged into giant basins. And in time, these basins merged into something unimaginably large, the first global oceans. For the first time in Earth's history, blue began to appear. Not bright blue, these early oceans were dark, murky, and filled with minerals. They were hot, almost as warm as a bathtub, but they were real water. From space, the planet looked different, less red, more black and blue. The fire world was cooling, calming, preparing. The scars of lava remained, but much of the molten chaos was now hidden beneath clouds and oceans. But even with oceans, Earth was still dangerous. Volcanoes erupted under the water, heating it violently. Hydrothermal vents shot boiling water mixed with chemicals into the ocean depths. Lightning storms raged overhead. Meteorites still fell, though much less often. Each one created waves that spread across the new seas. Yet something special was happening inside those oceans. The oceans were not just water, they were a giant chemical soup. Volcanic minerals dissolved in them. Heat stirred them. Lightning charged them with energy. The air above them mixed gases that could form organic molecules. The planet had unknowingly created a massive laboratory. A laboratory for life. Deep in the oceans, near cracks in the seafloor, hot water rich in minerals poured out. These cracks, hydrothermal vents, glowed with faint light like underwater volcanoes. They created pockets of warm, nutrient-rich water. In these pockets, molecules began to combine in strange ways. Carbon formed long chains. Hydrogen bonded with nitrogen. Simple organic compounds appeared, then more complex compounds, then something even more interesting. Tiny bubbles made of chemicals formed membranes around themselves. These bubbles trapped energy. They stored information. They reacted with the world around them. They were not yet alive, but they were close. Closer than anything had ever been. The planet's violent storms, once destructive, were now helping create the building blocks of life. Lightning split molecules apart and forced them together in new ways. Volcanic heat mixed chemicals. Water dissolved minerals and spread them across the oceans. Every part of Earth was working together. Fire, water, air, energy. The stage was set. Life could appear at any moment, but the exact moment when it finally happened is still a mystery. Scientists know the general time, but not the exact process. Somewhere in the deep oceans, perhaps in tiny rock pools or hot vents, something extraordinary occurred. A group of molecules formed a structure. This structure could copy itself very slowly, very simply. It was the first step toward life. It was not a creature. It had no shape, no senses, no movement, but it had one power, the power to replicate. As these early structures copied themselves, they changed. Mistakes happened. Mutations occurred. Some copies survived better than others. Over huge stretches of time, the successful ones multiplied. Earth's oceans were now full of microscopic experiments. The planet, once ruled by fire, was now ruled by chemistry. But even these early chemical lifelike forms were fragile. A shift in temperature, a sudden volcanic eruption, or a change in the ocean's chemicals could destroy them instantly. Many probably died, but the few that survived grew stronger, more complex, more stable. Life was close, very close, closer than ever before. And then after millions of years of slow, hidden change, a single structure crossed the line. It became alive. A tiny single-celled organism, simple but powerful, emerged in the ocean. It could eat. It could grow. It could reproduce. It could adapt. It was the first true living thing on Earth. Yet Earth itself remained unaware. The storms continued. The volcanoes erupted. The oceans boiled in places and cooled in others. The planet moved forward through time, not realizing that its next chapter had begun. But this tiny life form was not enough to change the world. It was too small, too simple, too fragile. The oceans were huge and chaotic. Survival was not guaranteed. Something had to happen next. Something that would transform this tiny spark into the first flame of life's evolution. And deep in the oceans, something was happening. Something that would not only protect life, but allow it to spread, multiply, and eventually take over the entire planet. A force was rising inside the oceans, growing slowly, secretly. A force that would reshape Earth's atmosphere, change the color of the sky, and rewrite the future of the planet forever. But what was it? And how could something so tiny change an entire world? The answer was about to awaken. The oceans of young Earth were dark, warm, and full of mystery. Thick clouds still covered the sky. Lightning cracked across the atmosphere like jagged white scars. Beneath the rolling waves, vents on the ocean floor released clouds of hot minerals, turning the waters into swirling chemical worlds. Inside this strange ocean, half peaceful, half violent, something extraordinary had finally appeared. Life, it was tiny, smaller than a grain of dust. It had no eyes, no mouth, no brain. It did not swim, it did not hunt. It existed as a single, simple cell floating quietly in the ancient sea. It was fragile, but it had one power that nothing before it possessed. It could reproduce. And because it could make copies of itself, it could evolve. This tiny cell, impossible to see with the naked eye, became Earth's first living creature. It carried inside it a small blueprint, a simple form of information that allowed it to survive, grow, and change slowly through time. It was the ancestor of every plant, animal, and human that would ever exist. But at this early stage, life faced a huge problem. Earth was still hostile. The oceans boiled in many places. Underwater volcanoes erupted without warning. Meteorites still sometimes crashed into the sea, releasing heat and pressure waves. The atmosphere was filled with toxic gases. UV radiation from the sun blasted the surface because Earth's protective layers were still thin. Life was fragile, too fragile to survive for long without the right environment. So these early organisms hid. They avoided the harsh light of the sun. They stayed deep in the oceans or close to hot vents where heat was stable and chemicals were available. These vents became their homes, dark, deep, and full of minerals. Here, life found a small chance to grow, but survival alone was not enough. If life was to succeed, it had to evolve, and slowly it did. The rise of the microbes. At first, these single-celled organisms were simple. They absorbed chemicals from their surroundings. They used energy from heat. They drifted with currents, but over millions of years, some cells developed new abilities. One group learned how to break down minerals faster. Another group learned how to store energy. Some developed thicker walls to protect themselves from heat. Others formed small tails, tiny structures that helped them move toward nutrients. Evolution was happening quietly, slowly, but everywhere. Earth's oceans had become a giant experiment. Every wave carried billions of cells, each slightly different. Most changes led nowhere and died quickly. But some changes made these small forms of life stronger, and strong cells survived. Over time, these survivors multiplied. Soon, the oceans were full of microbial communities, vast invisible empires of tiny living things. They floated in giant clouds, spread across currents, and covered the early seafloor. Life had not just appeared, it had begun to shape the planet. But something even more important was about to happen, something so powerful that it would change Earth's entire atmosphere. The most powerful discovery in the history of the planet. Among the many evolving microbes, one group developed a unique skill. They began to use sunlight. This group was different. They discovered a way to capture sunlight and use it to make their own energy. They did not need vents or minerals anymore. They floated toward the sunlight, rising toward the upper layers of the ocean. Scientists today call them cyanobacteria, but at this stage, they were just simple life forms trying something new. Their invention was the most important invention in history: photosynthesis. Through this new process, they used sunlight to make energy and released oxygen as a waste product. At first, the oxygen did nothing. It dissolved into the water, reacting with minerals. Iron-rich rocks on the ocean floor turned red as they absorbed the oxygen. But the microbes did not stop. They continued to produce oxygen every day, every month, every year for millions of years. Slowly, oxygen began to build up in the oceans. Then it escaped into the atmosphere. Earth's air was changing. Before this event, the atmosphere was deadly, filled with methane, ammonia, and carbon dioxide. Nothing bigger than a microbe could survive. But now, with oxygen rising slowly, the sky began to transform. Yet this transformation was not peaceful. Oxygen was a destructive gas for early life. Many ancient microbes could not survive in oxygen-rich environments. For them, oxygen was poisonous. Millions of early life forms died as oxygen levels increased. This event is known today as the Great Oxygenation Event, a mass extinction caused by life itself. But while oxygen killed many early organisms, it opened the door for something greater. The sky slowly shifted from a thick orange haze to a clearer blue. The dangerous methane fog faded. The sun's rays could now shine through the atmosphere without burning the surface. Even more important, oxygen created a new shield in the sky, the ozone layer, which began to block deadly UV radiation. For the first time ever, Earth was becoming safe. Safe for life to grow. Safe for life to expand. Safe for life to evolve into more complex forms. And deep in the oceans, life began to do exactly that. The first communities, the new oxygen-rich ocean, became a paradise for some microbes. They formed massive colonies. They built tiny layers of minerals around themselves. These layers piled up, creating strange rock-like structures called stromatolites. From above, stromatolites looked like small mounds rising from shallow waters, quiet, simple but incredibly important. For millions of years, these communities pumped oxygen into the atmosphere. They were the silent engineers of Earth's future. Without them, no plants, animals, or humans could exist. But while oxygen was transforming the world, life itself was becoming more creative. Some cells learned to work together, forming the earliest multicellular structures. Others learned to engulf smaller cells and use them as internal engines, leading to the creation of more powerful, complex cells. The oceans had changed from a chemical soup into a living world. Life was everywhere. Life was evolving faster. Life was preparing for its next big step. Yet Earth still had many challenges ahead. Volcanoes erupted violently, releasing clouds of ash. Changing climates created temperature swings. Ocean currents shifted. Continents were beginning to form and break apart. These changes pushed life to adapt again and again. Every new challenge created new species. Every new challenge killed the weaker ones. Every new challenge shaped Earth into a planet full of endless possibilities. But something larger was coming. A change so massive that it would reshape the oceans, transform the land, and create a crisis unlike anything life had faced before. It was a change that would test every living thing on Earth, and only the strongest would survive. Star cliffhanger ending for millions of years, life had dominated the oceans peacefully. Oxygen had filled the atmosphere. Simple creatures had evolved slowly into more complex organisms. But Earth was not done with surprises. Something deep inside the planet was shifting. Temperatures were changing, currents were moving, and a new threat, colder, deadlier, and far more powerful than anything life had faced before, was rising quietly. A threat that would freeze entire oceans, wipe out almost all living things, and force life to evolve in ways no one could imagine. But what was this coming disaster, and how would life survive it? The answer awaited in the next chapter. The world had changed. The dark, boiling oceans were no longer just chemical pools. They were alive. Billions of tiny organisms floated beneath the waves, building a new atmosphere and new possibilities. For the first time in Earth's long history, the planet was becoming calm enough, safe enough, and rich enough for something new to rise. But this rise would not be easy. Earth was about to test life again. Deep currents moved through the oceans like giant rivers. They carried heat, minerals, and nutrients to every corner of the planet. Sunlight reached shallow waters where cyanobacteria produced oxygen day and night. The sky grew brighter. Clouds thinned. The first rays of warm sunlight touched the surface with gentler energy. From space, Earth no longer looked like a world of fire or darkness. It was blue, alive, changing. But life inside the oceans was still simple. One cell, no eyes, no brain, no complexity. Then something extraordinary happened. The first leap toward complexity inside one tiny cell. A strange event occurred, something that would change the future of all life. A small organism entered another cell, but instead of being digested or destroyed, it stayed. It became part of the larger cell. This was the birth of complex cells called eukaryotes. These new cells were stronger. They had tiny internal engines. They could store energy better. They could survive in new environments. With this breakthrough, life took its next major step forward. Over millions of years, these complex cells began to work together. At first, they formed small groups, then layers, then simple bodies. Earth witnessed something it had never seen before, the first multicellular life. Small, soft organisms drifted in the water, too simple to be animals but too complex to remain only single cells. They formed shapes like threads, discs, and jelly-like sheets. They lived in shallow waters where sunlight was gentle and food was easy to find. But as these organisms evolved, Earth's climate began to shift again. A world entering ice without warning, temperatures dropped, clouds thickened, winds changed direction. The same oxygen that once gave life a chance now caused a dramatic cooling of the planet. As methane levels dropped, the air could no longer trap enough heat. Glaciers began to grow. Snow fell endlessly, the oceans cooled, ice spread from the poles toward the equator. Earth was entering its first great ice age, one so severe that it is now called Snowball Earth. From space, the planet looked like a glittering white marble. The oceans were locked under thick sheets of ice. Sunlight bounced away, temperatures plummeted. Life was trapped beneath the frozen world. Many organisms died. The shallow water communities collapsed. Only a few deep ocean microbes survived, hiding near warm vents where heat still escaped from Earth's interior. The planet was silent again. For millions of years, Earth remained frozen, a cold and lifeless-looking world. But deep in the darkness, life waited patiently. It adapted, it held on, it evolved, and eventually Earth warmed again. Volcanoes released carbon dioxide, the atmosphere thickened, trapped heat melted the ice. Oceans returned. Life emerged from hiding, stronger than before. This was the moment when evolution accelerated. The rise of strange soft creatures with the ice melted, and the climate-stable, complex life exploded across the oceans. Creatures appeared that had never existed before, soft, alien shapes that drifted like living pillows or crawled like strange rugs across the seafloor. These were the Ediacaran organisms, the first visible life on Earth. Some looked like leaves placed gently on the ocean floor. Others were shaped like discs, rings, or tall fronds. They did not have mouths, eyes, or bones. They absorbed food directly through their skin. They were the first experiment in large life. From space, Earth looked peaceful, blue oceans, white clouds, greenish coastlines. But under the water, a silent revolution had begun. Life was no longer tiny or invisible. It had become big, bold, and creative, but something was still missing. Movement, hunting, defense, speed, intelligence. The next step would change everything. The great oxygen rise leads to a new era as cyanobacteria continued producing oxygen. Levels in the atmosphere rose higher than ever before. Oxygen spread through the oceans too, allowing more energy to be used by living bodies. Energy meant strength. Strength meant complexity. Complexity meant evolution. Cells combined to form tissues. Tissues formed organs. Organs formed bodies. Eyes began to appear. Simple at first, only spots that sensed light, but soon more advanced. Muscles evolved. Limbs evolved. Directions evolved. Life could now move with purpose. And then, in one of the greatest bursts of creativity the planet has ever seen, evolution accelerated dramatically. This event is known today as the Cambrian explosion. In a relatively short time, even by cosmic standards, life diversified into thousands of new forms. Creatures with shells, creatures with teeth, creatures that swam, creatures that hunted, creatures that built armor, creatures that hid in mud, creatures that sensed danger, creatures that chased their prey. For the first time ever, the ocean had predators. Life was no longer peaceful. It became competitive, fast, dangerous, exciting. The world had moved from simple one-celled life to a planet full of complex, active creatures. Earth was not just alive anymore. It was dynamic. But evolution had one more surprise waiting. The first steps toward land while the oceans flourished with life. The land remained barren, nothing but rock, dust, and wind. But oxygen continued to rise, and the atmosphere became thicker, richer, and safer. Some brave organisms, tiny and fragile, began to move toward the shoreline. Simple algae grew near the edges of the water. Microbial mats climbed onto moist rocks. Plants began their earliest experiments on land. These plants were small, soft, and weak, but they performed a miracle. They released even more oxygen into the air. With more oxygen, new paths opened for evolution. Animals followed the plants. Small worm-like creatures crawled out, then small bug-like creatures, then amphibious shapes with early limbs. Land, once silent and lifeless, began to host movement. The world was entering a new phase, a world with forests, insects, fish with legs, and creatures that would one day walk fully on land. But the journey from ocean to land was slow and full of danger. Many creatures failed, many species vanished, yet the strongest survived and evolved. Earth was becoming a world filled with ecosystems, food chains, and interactions. And all of this, from forests to humans, began because of that first tiny cell in the deep oceans. But the story was not over. The world was about to face something entirely new. A change bigger than fire, ice, or oxygen. A force that would dominate the planet in ways no creature ever had. A creature with curiosity. A creature with tools. A creature with language. A creature that could question the universe itself. But how did life evolve from simple ocean creatures to intelligent beings? What trials shaped their bodies, minds, and civilizations? What disasters pushed evolution forward again and again? The next chapter of Earth's story is the story of us, and it begins right after the cliffhanger.